Hi, hello, everybody, and welcome to Fandom Forum. My name is Joe Compton, and this is GoIndieNow, and this is our inaugural episode of our very first show. I'm very, very blessed to have an incredible group of people here, and we're going to talk about an incredible series. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves first, and then we'll get into talking about the series.
Hi, I'm Virginia Gray. I am an author and also a huge fan of reading. C.L. Schneider is probably my favorite living fantasy author, and C.L. and I met on Twitter several years ago, just in a casual conversation, and I got to read her work and found it amazing.
I am MLS Weech. I'm an author, and I first met Cindy about a year ago. Oddly enough, she shared her image, and I saw the cover to her first book, Magic Price, and I thought that it was amazing. And she thanked me, and so because she was polite and not too pushy, I picked up that book, and I grew to respect her so much that I kind of looked to her as a mentor, and she actually recruited me into the Slush Brain alongside her and a bunch of other authors.
I'm Lou Whitley. I am also an indie author. I met Sydney through another author's Facebook party, and I randomly won a copy of Magic Price, I think for writing dirty limericks. And I read it, I absolutely loved it, and then I just started stalking the hell out of her, and now we're pretty good friends.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm a UK-based fantasy author, KS Marsden. Got to know Cindy through Indie Books Be Seen over the last few years, and I jumped on Magic Price and basically become a bit of a stalker and a fangirl.
Hey, I'm John Santana. I'm a comic book author. I write comics. I've got 2 series right now, Jaded and Everhounds. And Jaded, shameless plug, is on Kickstarter right now.
Nice.
But here's the way I met Cindy. It was at a comic book convention, I want to say 2013. We were booth mates. She was right next to me. And we just started talking up a storm, and we instituted this trade situation that we've got going on. So every time I see her at a convention, I trade her a comic, and she trades me a book. And I've kept up with her along the way. Every time she puts out a book, I put out a comic. Now, mind you, her books are what, like 500 pages, and my comics are about 25. But we do have artwork and everything that we put into it. So it's a pretty cool deal that she and I have going on, and we sign each other's stuff, and it's pretty cool.
I'm JMD Reed. I'm an indie fantasy author. I met Cindy on Facebook, same sort of author friend groups, and I read her first book and I really enjoyed it. It was an exciting read.
Describe Ian Troy to those who have never met him.
He's a good man who's done a terrible thing and feels he deserves to be punished for it, but he can't stop trying to make the world a better place.
I see him as he's self-mutilating, but he's also he's an addict. He can't help the draw of magic, but he is, he fights against it, and he's trying to be, I guess he's trying to atone for his sins. He only sees the destruction that he has caused rather than any benefit that came out of the event that started this whole book and then the prologue. And so I kind of see him as this kind of rogue guy who's just kind of beating himself up all the time.
I love reading Ian as a volcano on the verge of erupting. He knows it, though. He knows he's caused all this destruction, and that's what really grabbed me. He's got an addiction. I thought magic and addiction was such a cool concept. And then he's got this power, and he's used it, and people suffered, and he knows it's in him. And because of his addiction throughout the series, he is so afraid that he's going to just blow up at any moment, and there could be casualties at any moment.
Yeah, I think I agree. He's addicted to magic, he's addicted to women, and he makes bad decisions when it comes to both.
I related him as Travis Fimmel, kind of the lead guy from Vikings.
Yes.
You know, he's got this rough exterior, but he's been through some stuff, you know, but he's still attractive in my eyes anyway. I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
Well, I would sure like to put Ian, like many of the female characters, against a tree and run my tongue up his sternum. So I find I find him incredibly attractive, and that he's, you know, in these leather pants and he's this gorgeous, you know, build. I think he's incredibly sexy, and I think that drives me through the book as much as the action or any of the other things. Is I want to know what's going on with Ian. I want to see him. I want him, you know, in the center of the action all the time.
It took us all of 10 minutes to get to that, to get to the conversation to devolve. Yeah. But no, it's my fault. I led the question that way. So, but
I really think her cover artist captured what Ian looks like, because it's hard not to think about that figure on the cover when you're reading the books. It's a very striking figure with the dark skin and white hair.
I would agree with you, but what's cool is that we never really see his face on the covers. And so whether it really fit her description or not, mostly because of his the way he acted and carried himself, I thought of Idris Elba with white hair and white eyes. That power that he has. Might be the wrong age, might be the wrong race, but I don't know, just worked for me.
What element of this world that was built in this series do you think is its strongest?
It would have to be the magic system and how it worked and how its consequences and how, you know, there was always a price to be paid to do anything with it, and its impact it had on the world around it. I mean, it shaped the history of that world in such a profound way. When you get back into the backstory, which I don't want to go into the spoilers, but sort of the history of how it evolved and how it led to the world's current state.
I would agree. It's the magic. It's the way that the magic's used. I think you called it the magic system. That's a great way to put it. It's the draw. It's what makes this book unique and makes the character unique.
I think she also does a really good job of putting you in the world too. You know, when you talk about the places that have been scarred by magic, you can almost feel that kind of arid, dead quality of the place. And, you know, when you're in the forest, you can feel the forest. When you're in the, you know, the hills, you can feel the hills. So it's kind of like you're there. And not many fantasy writers achieve that.
I think another thing to mention is the politics of the world. A lot of people skip to all the awesome things Ian does, and they forget where he and his people start and where he and his people finish, and how some of his friendships evolve. And in a lot of stories, you have stories that are all about the politics, and I don't particularly enjoy that sort of political drama in and of itself. Then you have those other stories that are about, you know, people coming to power. And for an author to be able to overlay things to understand, she did a great job of picking, I would say, 4 things. She said, I'm not going to go into this or this or this, but I'm going to pick 4 things that I'm going to build my world around. And the magic system has a history and a culture. The race that Ian comes from has a history and a culture. And the political landscape they're dealing with has an equally developed history and culture. And she, rather than trying to overextend herself into doing everything sweepingly, she focused on, I'm going to do these things very well and execute this part of my story. And if I get bored later on in life, I can go visit these other areas that I can think about. But it lets the readers stay into a tighter, more cohesive area. The world isn't broad, but the visceral reality of the area of the world we're in is undeniable.
Well, I quite like the theme of fate that seems interwoven, especially when you finish the series and you look back on it and you wonder, was it all planned all along, and how it all interacted in various timelines. and brought the characters to where they ended up being. I just was really in awe of all that.
Lacking a scrap of detail or clothing of any kind, the beings lacked faces as well. They had no skin or hair or any discernible texture. Their bodies were solid darkness, indistinct, willowy, and ghost-like. I watched them close in, 8, 12, 16, 20. I know what this is, I said, losing track. Their numbers were growing too fast to count. They're shadows. Shadows of what? Us. Sorry, Troy, but last time I checked, I only had one shadow. At any given moment, yes, but how many do you think you make in a day? I felt Malik's glance. So they're all coming. Every shadow I've ever made is coming to kill me. Not all of them. It depends on how long Draken's magic user has been gathering them up. If he's tracked us since we left Kale, then I slid him a look. Gods, but I hate magic.
There are several races represented in this book. Do you feel like you knew what world you were in at the time you were reading it? Does she do a good job of transitioning in that respect?
I think she does such a good job of describing each main character that comes from each race that you kind of can extrapolate what the rest of the race is like. You know, there are these big figures that are like unmistakable. And, you know, okay, well, if they describe this type of shoulders, well, this is obviously this race. And if, you know, they describe this type of hair, this is obviously this race. So she doesn't have to come out and say this person is of this race. You already know.
Well, and Kelly, you touched upon this already with when I asked the world building question, but about its theme, about fate. What do you feel is the strongest theme throughout this series that resonated with you so strongly?
Everything. I don't know. I just Ian, the central character. He's got the whole question of fate, and is he just a puppet of fate? And if he does something, will it push further into the bad guy's hands or not? And he's constantly just plagued by all these troubles. And it just seems such a normal sort of person in the middle of something so crazy and ridiculous and amazing.
Well, I think as far as themes go, I think addiction is a strong theme throughout the book. And it's what really tied me in, because it's so ironic that he's addicted to something that is a potential solution, but he can't trust himself to use it as a solution because he's afraid of the path it may take him down. So that's why I love addiction as the main theme of the book.
I thought that was so unusual to pull that anyway, you know, as addiction to center a fantasy book around that. So I agree.
Give everybody one non-spoiler thing, event, idea, or person, maybe even a character related to this series that people should look for when they first pick it up. What's one thing you would tell them to strap in for and look for that you found that you thought that maybe most people weren't touching upon it, and maybe you read a review or something, or you read the blurb and you found something different? It sounds like for you, John, it was the addiction thing really sung to you. Was there a certain moment in the book that you found where it was like, okay, this is a story that really sings to me like that?
What I'd say is, if you're like me and you hate first-person perspective narrative, right? Give this book a chance beyond the first chapter, because I have never enjoyed a book. I think I can honestly say that was written that way. I think the writer puts themselves into many traps when they choose that narrative. She navigates it beautifully. I think that she does an excellent job because the character is so self-introspective. It's worth it. So if you're like me and you're looking at a sample online, you're like, oh, first-person narrative, forget it. Give it a chance. Trust me, she knows what she's doing.
I think it's the only real heavy fantasy series I've ever read that was first person, and that's fairly impressive that she pulled that off, because she has to keep her character in the heart of all the action to be able to tell the story, because it's all from his POV. And it would be easy for her to have multiple characters to tell the story, but she kept that focus and she made it work.
Also, you don't know what's happening outside of Ian's perspective, just like he doesn't know what's happening outside of his perspective. So you're like, well, what's happening over there? But you can't know until it gets back to where he's with those characters. So it's more real than having it switch back and forth, where you're like, oh, well, I'm not really interested in that storyline. I want to be back over here.
If I'm being honest, and you won't shoot me, the narrative and I'm trying to write more first person so that I hate it less, but that's actually why I'm doing it. I think first person narrative works a lot. I think it's far more successful with Cindy's new series. But the thing I was most frustrated about with Crown of Stones was first person, not because she didn't do it right. She did it expertly. But because, particularly with Malik, I thought Malik deserved his own book, if not his own series, and he was such a compelling character, and I was mostly mad because I didn't get my fill of Malik and his arc and what was going on. And I think he's, Ian's gonna get the main stage. Ian's gonna get the limelight. Most people will talk about Ian, and I'm usually the only guys like, no one's gonna talk about Malik. No one's going to talk about how cool his story is, how cool this is going on. So if I could boss Cindy around, I'd tell her to give me a Malik story.
Actually, I have told her that I don't know how many times, because he is one of my book boyfriends. And I told her, you can ask her. And before every single new book came out, I'm like, does he die? Because I don't even want to read it if he dies. I would be so mad.
Well, let's get into the ancillary characters. Is there one in particular? Obviously, we've talked about Malik now. So, is there somebody else that new readers, people discovering this series, should pay attention to and demand more of? Who else do you want to join your bandwagon to tell Cindy to write more about that character other than Malik? Is there another one out there?
Well, I love Jared very much. I felt that I watched his evolution, but my nails as that happened. But he comes off, and initially as just this kid, this hero worship kind of a kid, and he just is so much more than that. So I really, really enjoyed Jared.
Yeah, I agree. I just love watching his connection with Troy and where Troy takes him, and it's almost like a mirror of what's happening with them. And Jared does help to bring so much more humanity to Troy and ground him. And I think he's a very understated and very important character.
I actually really like Jem. Not only is Jem truly outrageous. Anybody?
The merits.
He goes beyond the normal villain tropes when you discover his motivations.
Go ahead, Lou. You can pontificate and enjoy more of Malik if you'd like. We'll listen.
No, I got it out there. I was like, well, CL will strike me with something if I don't say something about Malik, because I have been bothering her for years about him. Every time we're in a conversation, I'm like, no, he's mine, and you can't have him. I think, like I said, it's just that she fleshed out each character so well that, you can see their motivations. You can see their reasons. It's not like anybody is a good character and anybody is a bad character. There's not like a true hero and villain. Everybody has done bad things. Everybody has done good things. Everybody has, their own reasons, which they think are, the best reasons. And that's, really true to life.
Was there something new and surprising to you all that happened in books 2 and 3? I know it's hard to say without spoilers, but is there something that was unique and different about those books that that you enjoyed, that you were surprised about when you, after reading book one and to getting into the next two books? Was there a certain character that she introduced, or a certain moment that you guys went, oh, that's pretty cool, that's neat that happened in these books?
Yeah, I read these in 2016. Magic Cars is actually one of my top 3 reads for 2016. I think that book was the best in the series, in my opinion. But it's been a minute, so if someone can help me with a name, the character who is the Eve of the new race.
You mean Cian?
Virginia just got the cheat sheets.
And I you know, on one page, like watching Star Wars now, I'm kind of like, no, Cindy, don't go that way, because no fans will like it. It's a saga, apparently. But I honestly thought that, you know, I like Flashpoint. But when I finished Crown of Stones, I thought, okay, now here comes Scene's story. Let's go. She's like, nah, I got a dragon I got to deal with. And I felt, in the right way and in the appropriate way, particularly when you think about his relationship with Jared. Scene comes in at a perfect point in time, and it just blindsides him and completely changes Ian's motives. I think it was well timed. Anyone who says she actually comes out of left field wasn't paying attention to the Jared arc closely enough. But Ian needed Jared to be ready for Scene.
I had 2 things. If we go, one was the real darkness, and I think it was book 2, where, you know, they're imprisoned, you know, Ian's in prison, there's this drug-induced, you know, awfulness, and getting through that and then going back and look at what happened to Jared and the Scene, all of those things, that was very, it was very powerful. And the second thing that I found really something that struck home, or I really enjoyed, was the going back in time. That's something that, you know, that was handled really interestingly. The going from, okay, this magic took him back in time and he could watch his world develop, and then crashing down, the history of, you know, 500 years ago, the history, or maybe it was more, of his race. And to get a glimpse of, you know, the beginning of a race is fascinating, I think.
It's just the way, it wasn't cheesy. Like, the method in which he time traveled is almost like an air quotes time travel, you know? It was like an experience for him, and I thought that was very unique, and I like the way that was handled throughout the series. And then there's one more thing I want to say. In the 3rd book, I can do this without spoiling. I can. I won't say the character's name. There's a scene and a character that is so unique, and this is more of a technical aspect, the way she pulled this off, but the character is amorphous and is transformative and fluid as the character goes back and forth between gender and age and size. I thought that was just amazingly handled. I was really there, and I could watch it happening with the character, with the way that she wrote it. So technically, that piece in the 3rd book was my favorite.
One of my favorite parts of is it the 2nd book, where there's a certain time jump forward, and I think at that point Cindy had already established that it does get dark and there is a big price. I just remember stopping at that point and thinking, you clever booker.
I liked how she wasn't afraid to upset the status quo of the story with radical shifts and change in narrative directions. It always kept it interesting.
For those of you who've had contact with Cindy, it sounds like everybody here has. What was your experience like in meeting her? And do you feel like you love that part of the indie community, having that direct access to the artist? Do you think that's an especially strong point to this community and why it is important in that respect?
The indie world is fantastic. The indie world is so unique, and it's really the way all authors, all publication businesses should be, you know, that you can reach out as professionals and colleagues to one another and ask questions and interact. And the indies in general, like CL or any, I mean, some of you already mentioned, she reached out, she told you, which groups, hey, try this guy, hey, you need to meet this person. That happens across the indie spectrum. And I think it's beautiful. I attend a lot of conferences, where I've spoken with very, like, New York Times bestselling, traditionally published authors, and they don't understand the business necessarily, except for I write and they do the rest, or they are not willing or able to connect you with other people. And I think because we're grassroots here, I mean, we're making this happen. Well, it's a beautiful time to be an independent author.
Well, I think when I first started talking to Cindy, I expressed to her how much I really loved the book, probably in inappropriate stalker-like terms. And she, later on, she would send me like a passage and go, okay, does this fit with what the rest of the book was? So it's kind of like you get to, you want the rest of the book, but you get to be a part of the creation of that book too. So when you're in an indie community, you can have like more of a involvement in the creation, and not just, well, I read your book, I really like it. It's, I really like this character. Can you write more about this character? And then suddenly there's more about that character. It's an interesting dynamic that way.
It's a little unfair because to me, Cindy's an amazing writer. 2 for 2 right now. She's had a book high on my list. So she's already an amazing writer, and I would think so regardless. But what comes across with her is she, and the indie community is already supportive. She is that much more supportive than anyone else you can find in that indie community.
Well, I just gotta say, I thought Cindy talked to me because I was special. So.
When I put out Magic Price, I know I could have done another pass. In fact, I just did another edit on it in the spring and uploaded a new version of it because I knew but I needed to get it done. I needed to get it out there because that had been such a dream for me, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't let it sit here anymore. I had to let it go. But the other two, I think I felt ready. I just felt like it was ready. I'm not really sure how to explain it. And I published Magic Price, and people started buying it, and people started reaching out to me, and I'm like, oh my God, I need a website, and I need this, and I need that, and it was like a whirlwind. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I really like this. This is fun.